Hi everybody, this is Rosie from Fine Lines Face and Body Art and welcome today to my tutorial on a realistic wound. This is done without any prosthetics, just face paint, a little bit of face paint powder and that's it. It's a great one for Halloween but also all year round. It's actually one of my most asked for boys designs today. You can make really quite impressive big gashes in the same amount of time as a small gash. And it's good to be able to do that without having to carry extra wax or latex or fake blood. This is the equipment that I used. We have a Low Cornell 795 round number 1 brush. I've also got a Low Cornell 795 round number 2 brush, which has to be dry because we're going to use that for the powder. A number 1 brush would also be fine, but something fairly fine. And then a middle red face paint cake. This is actually a tag regular red. Nothing too bright, nothing too orange, something that looks quite blood red really. And then Diamond FX Essential Black. And I also use Diamond FX Essential White. You'll also need an empty lid, which we're going to use for mixing colours and shades of red and also black and also skin tones. Middle right we've got Mehron, I don't know how to say that, Mehron Star Blend compressed powder, the black one, which we're going to use for the shading to make it look a bit more 3D. You could also, if you don't have the black powder, then don't worry, you can also use watered down black paint, which I'll show you how to do as well. And then at the bottom there is we've got an alternative here. You can either use an already made up skin tone colour, so the one on the bottom right in the square little pot is actually global skin colour. So I think it's the lightest tint that they do. It has to be lighter than the skin you're about to put it on. So if you have a very dark skinned person, you wouldn't need such a light skinned tone. But for me, I'm fairly light skinned, so I really need a very light skin tone. And then we have, if you don't have the global skin tone, then you can also mix your own skin tone colour. And for that I will use an orange and a white mixed together. I'll show you how to do that later. The orange should be a nice, I would say a mid-orange, not too yellowy, not too reddy, just a nice one here. And I'm using here the Fab Tiger Orange. The Diamond FX Orange, Essential Orange is also quite a nice one, but obviously use whatever you have in your kit. So let's get painting. First of all, we need the red cake. I'm going to wet the paintbrush, the number 1 paintbrush, with some water and get the red paint activated. Now, as you can see, I'm trying to show you here, is when I'm loading the brush, I'm actually twisting the brush, and that makes a really nice fine point on the brush, which means that when you apply it to your head or whichever part of the skin you're painting, you'll be able to create some really nice thin lines. And I'm making sure that in the middle of the wound there's a nice gaping hole to make it an impressive wound. I'm making sure the ends of the wound go to a very, very fine point either end, as if it's been slashed with a knife or a scalpel. Now, you may think that this red looks too bright for a wound, but actually we're going to tone it down with some darker shades. Okay, next up, you need your empty lid and a paintbrush. So, if you grab your empty lid and put some red paint in, don't cover the whole of the lid because you'll need the rest of the lid for mixing other colours. And then you need to take this is all done with a number 1 paintbrush, dab your already wet brush with the red on into the black, just the tip, so that you can add a bit of black to the red colour. Looks quite dark, but as you mix it in, you'll see that it turns a nice shade of dark blood red. I decided that the colour wasn't dark enough for what I wanted, so I added a bit more and mixed it up again. There, that's better. So this is going to be used for the shading inside the wound to make it look more 3D. And the darker bits are obviously going to be the bits that are covered up the most or get the least light. So they're going to be the edges of the wound as the wound is closing up. So I'm applying the paint, moving it towards the inside of the wound, and then actually using my finger to blend it a little bit. We don't want any straight lines or any paintbrush lines seen. So I'm using my finger to just dab it, not smearing, just literally just dabbing, and that really nicely mixes up the edges of the paint. Now here on this side, when I use my finger, the paint had got a bit dry, so when I dabbed it, it actually took some of the paint off. You can see that. So I had to have a couple of goes at just adding paint just to keep it a bit wetter. And I dabbed it again. It's happened again, look. So don't panic, just put a bit more paint on until you fill the gaps up. And along the edges of the wound where it's really gaping, it needs to be a little bit darker as well, because these edges want to look like the skin is standing away from the edge of the wound. So it needs to have a little bit of shadow around the edge. Okay, so we're going to take the black again and add a bit more black to our red palette. And that's going to make it obviously a bit darker again. And we're going to use this paint to emphasise the depth of the wound. So I'm not going to cover up what I've already done entirely. I'm just going to go over the bits which should be the darkest. So really inside the wound, as the wound is opening up. And again, I'm just dabbing it to try and blend it in a little bit. And again, maybe along the edge which is gaping open the most. Okay, so that's the inside of the wound, pretty much finished. Now we need to make the wound pop out of the design a little more. So we're going to use a very light skin tone colour. You can either use your skin tone palette, colour from your palette, or you can make your own skin tone. Here I'll show you how to make your own. It's very easy. We use some white and orange mixed together. You might think that skin colour is actually white and red to make pink, but in fact white and orange work a lot better, for my skin tone anyway. Add some white to your palette, your lid palette, and then with the same brush add some orange, and that will make it into a really nice peach colour. I'm afraid the lighting here was just too light to show up the colour properly in the lid. Here it looks very white, but in fact it was a really nice peachy colour, just lighter than my skin. So I need to go around the entire wound edges, not on the inside of the wound edge, but on the outside of the wound edge on the skin side. Keeping the line fairly even, apart from at the edge, right in the corners, right on the tapered edges where it can also taper off. We're now going to blend in this lighter line into the actual skin to make it less abrupt finish. So I'm using a wet brush. I've got the paint off my brush. I've wet it again with clean water. I've got rid of a lot of the water either on a paper towel, or here I've just used my back of my hand just to wipe off a bit of the excess water. So it's wet, but not dripping wet. And then I'm using that to drag the line that we've put on into my skin tone, just to blend it out. Another tip is not to use the point of the brush for this, but to use the flat edge. Put it flat against your skin and drag it along. It gives a much less accurate line, so it looks more smudged and more blended in. Okay, so that's pretty much the bottom edge done. I'll speed up the video and we'll quickly do the top edge. Wet the paintbrush again, get rid of the excess water, and blend the light skin tone into the actual skin. So in order to make this design look much more effective in 3D, we're going to use some shadowing. For this I'm going to use the compressed powder. Get your dry brush, so load up your brush, making sure the tip's nice and pointy, so you can roll your brush as you're loading it up. Give the brush a bit of a tap on the edge of the cake to get rid of the big lumps of powder, and then start applying it to your design. It's good if you can keep the distance between the edge of the wound and your shadow about the same distance apart along the wound. If you look, it gives the optical illusion of the swollen edge of the wound because there's a shadow underneath and a lighter bit on top which has lost its blood supply. So this is about 2-3-4 millimeters away from the lighter edge of the wound. And I'm just going to put it, I'm not going to put shadow all the way along, just sort of towards the tapered edges. Okay, we need some stitches. So load up your number 1 brush again, your wet brush, and again twizzle the paintbrush as you load it so that you get a really fine tip. And with this fine tip we're going to do some really quite fine stitches. They start where the swelling is on the upper side and they finish where the swelling is on the lower side. You can do cross stitches or normal stitches, whatever you like. Okay. Now this technique is a watercolour technique, I suppose, and it can also be used for shadowing. So if you don't have the powder to make shadows, you can also use this method for making your shadows around your wound. So you need some black paint, putting in your lid palette, and then adding lots of water. So it's really quite a runny mixture and very see-through and not very black at all. It's more like a dark grey. Test it a little bit on your hand, get rid of a lot of the paint once you've loaded your brush up so that you don't have too much paint on there. It's fairly dry and it's not too dark. So here I'm just emphasising where there are very fine shadows on the stitches. So round the bottom and top edges where the stitches go into the skin, that can have a little bit of darkness there, a little bit of shadow. And I'm also just pulling a little bit of paint out from the stitch end so that it looks like it's tugging on the skin a little bit. It's giving a bit of shadow. It's just tugging on the skin a little bit more where the stitches are. And I'll just speed that up a bit for you for the other stitches as well. So a little bit of dark around each end of the stitch, little tugging marks on each end of the stitch, and also you can make a little shadow on the underside of each stitch. There we are, just a little bit of shadow just to make it pop out from the wound again. So on the inside of any curve. Alright, so stitches are there. And the last thing we need to do is just to make the wound look fairly fresh, is to add some glistening bloody tissue inside the wound. For this you need some actually very dry white paint. So wet your paintbrush, get it in the mix it into the white, but keep mixing until it really is quite dry and sticky. You could never do a teardrop with this paint. It's just too sticky. And when it is that sticky, then it's perfect for applying to the red. You don't want it all over, you don't want it in straight lines, you don't want any big blotches. It's really just where the light is catching the tissue of the tissue underneath the skin. So For the end picture, I just added a little bit of the dark red paint again, in just to add a little bit of blood dripping down because I fancied that. Thank you very much for watching. If this video is helpful to you, then please don't forget to rate and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Bye.